Have you ever considered what it means to mature gracefully and purposefully? What happens when you're dealing with loneliness, loss, and the inexorable passage of time? This film is about more than just becoming older. It is about the amazing path of embracing and living one's later years to the fullest. You'll meet Jack Thompson, a 62-year-old man who has experienced both the joys and heartaches of aging. From the death of his beloved wife to the growing sense of solitude as his children develop their own lives. Jack's narrative is very personal, yet it connects with so many of us as we confront similar problems and joys as we age. Why should you stick around and watch this video until the end? Because Jack's story is not unique, it reflects the universal realities that many of us will endure as we age. Throughout his journey, you'll learn how to cope with loss, make new friendships, and live a full life even in solitary. You'll learn the vital insight he received from his connection with Laura, a lady who unexpectedly entered his life and guided him through the intricacies of aging with strength and tenacity. Jack's narrative also illuminates the difficult decisions that seniors frequently face, such as relocating to a nursing home, and how to approach these decisions with calm, confidence, and an open heart. By the end of this movie, you'll have a better knowledge of how to love your most important relationships, accept independence, and take complete charge of your life as you get older. Whether you're in your 60s, 70s, or beyond, Jack's story will motivate you to make the most of your later years, regardless of the challenges life throws at you. Don't pass up the opportunity to learn crucial lessons from someone who has endured everything and emerged even stronger. If you haven't already, subscribe and use the notification bell to ensure you don't miss any of my videos. Your support means everything to me. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it to help me continue to disseminate these vital ideas. Now let's get into the plot. I'd always envisaged retiring when I could finally unwind and enjoy the results of my labor. I had methodically planned for the future, anticipating that it would ultimately arrive. But as life often does, it threw me a curveball. I had to retire earlier than I had planned. Fortunately, I had always been aware of my expenditures, keeping a close eye on my finances and saving for a rainy day. So monetarily, I was doing okay. But there was something I hadn't anticipated, the profound hush that now permeated my life. My family was once the center of my world. My son Adam and daughter Emily had their own families. Their lives were steady, and they were flourishing in their own ways. I was proud of them, of course, but a part of me wished for the days when the house was filled with laughter and the pitter-patter of little feet. However, the house gradually became quieter. The energy that previously filled it gradually vanished. Sarah, my lovely wife, died several years ago after a protracted illness. That loss created a void in my heart that never seemed to mend. My once close children became increasingly preoccupied with their own busy lives as time passed. They visited less and less, and as time passed, I found myself more and more alone. One afternoon, I sat on the sofa, surrounded by the silence of my empty home. The silence seems to swallow me whole. I could only hear my own heartbeat and the faint murmur of the world outside. The interiors, which had once been vibrant and cheerful, now seemed to echo my feelings of loneliness. I felt it deep inside my bones, an ache of bitterness I couldn't shake. The phone rang as I sat there, attempting to put those feelings aside. It was Adam. His voice came across as anxious and hurried. "Dad, will you be staying home tonight? There's some urgent work and I might not be able to come by," he remarked, his tone heavy with concern. I felt a flicker of disappointment in my chest, but I tried to ignore it. I understood. Adam had a family of his own, a demanding job, and a life to live. He had obligations. I didn't want to bother him with my loneliness, so I responded with fake composure. "It is fine, Adam. Do not worry about me. Just take care of your belongings. I'm fine here." I hung up, feeling a hollow ache within me. It was as if the world had faded away, leaving me behind. I had worked so hard all those years, poured my heart and soul into providing for my family, only to discover that now, in my retirement, with Sarah gone and the children living their own lives, I was left to face the stillness alone. The emptiness appeared to get deeper with each passing day. The following day, my neighbor John visited me. John and I were almost the same age and had always loved our talks. But this time there was an unspoken weight in the air. He sat alongside me, and after a few moments of stillness, he sighed heavily. "So, it's just you here now, huh?" he inquired, his gaze roaming the room for the emptiness that mirrored my emotions. I nodded, not saying much. His words hung in the air like a weight. "Same for me," he added, his voice filled with grief that touched me to the core. "My wife is busy, and the kids are doing their own thing." I could feel the grief in his words, which reflected the terrible emptiness I felt. John's statements about loneliness at this point in life felt like a cold, hard reality that I couldn't shake. "You must think about it. What if one day you're all alone?" he inquired, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. I felt my heart sink into my gut. The prospect of being utterly alone in this large mansion, with no one to chat with or check in on me, filled me with fear. His question nagged at me, playing over and over in my head. What if I am left alone? What shall I do? I tried to brush it off, but it was still there, haunting me. A few days later, Emily arrived with her son, Noah. She brought some of his favorite childhood recipes, perhaps hoping for a longer visit. But as soon as Emily walked through the door, she raced to explain. "Dad, I'm just dropping by to let Noah see you for a bit, but then I have to go pick up Tom." Her hurried tone, her leaping eyes, and Noah's frightened expression shattered my heart. I tried to grin and hide the anguish in my chest, but it was difficult. "Go ahead. Take care of what you have to do. I am fine here." I spoke, but the words felt hollow as soon as they left my lips. Emily hardly sat down before dashing out the door with Noah in tow. I waited at the door, watching them leave, the sound of their footsteps gradually diminishing. The home felt much emptier now, and the silence was suffocating. I couldn't stop the tears that welled up in my eyes, or the sense of abandonment that sank heavily in my heart. That night, as I lay in bed, the prior question resurfaced with excruciating clarity. What do I do if I am left alone? I couldn't continue like this. I realized I needed to do something. I couldn't continue drifting through this calm, lonely existence. A few days later, I met John at the park for a walk. We sat on a seat and watched people go by, their lives a blur around us. I turned to John, my heart heavy from everything that had been weighing on me. "You were right about everything," I responded, my voice full of emotion. "I have been thinking a lot about what you said. How can we cope at our age if we are left alone?" John nodded in agreement, his eyes softening with empathy. "I've thought about it too," he said. "We need to plan for a few things ahead of time. We can't wait until the last minute to worry." John's voice was steady and almost reassuring. "The most important thing is to ensure our financial stability. We need enough to cover food and essentials so we don't go hungry." I nodded in accord. The fact was undeniable. Without financial security, aging can be a tough battle. I had always prided myself on being frugal with my money, but suddenly, I realized I needed to consider what the future held. Medical expenditures, crises, and the unknowns that often seem to appear at the most inconvenient times. John kept going. "With no spouse or kids nearby, it's up to us to take care of ourselves." These remarks rang true. It was a difficult truth, but it was the reality we both faced. I felt a flash of determination rise inside me. The future may not have to be this dark. there may still be time to prepare, take charge, and devise a strategy that would allow me to live my final years with dignity and purpose. But it was evident that I needed to act immediately before the stillness became too much to endure. Living alone makes you realize that, despite your children's love and care, they cannot always be there for you when you need them the most. It's a harsh reality that hits you like a frigid blast of wind on an otherwise pleasant day. "We have to become more independent," John added, and his words resonated deeply with me. "We have to take care of ourselves, stay active, and never isolate ourselves." It was as if he was speaking right to me. For so long I had dedicated my life to my children, caring for them and prioritizing their needs over mine. However, I had disregarded the quality of my own life. Years had passed, and all I had to show for it was a life spent watching television in a room that felt more like a jail than a home. I was alive, but not fully alive, and the loneliness was taking its toll on me. The realization hit me like a slap in the face. I couldn't continue living this way. My health, happiness, and everything else hinged on how I changed. It was so simple to fall into the comfort of habit and let time slip away unknowingly. But deep down, I knew this path would only lead to one thing: a gradual descent into poor health and loneliness. I could not let that happen. So, I decided to change my habits, no matter how difficult it looked at first. Each morning I began walking to the park. Even though it was only a short stroll, it was meaningful. It was a start towards taking back control of my life. In the evenings, I found refuge in the community center, where I played chess and chatted with other elders. At first, it was awkward, and I felt the weight of loneliness pulling me back into my shell. But gradually, I developed new pals, and I could sense my life getting richer and more satisfying. Despite all of the new activities, a gnawing emptiness persisted. Every night while I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the same question plagued me. Who will be there for me when I'm sick, need someone to talk to, or when I'm going through a difficult time? The silence in the room intensified my anxieties, and the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. I had always been satisfied to live alone, but now I couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps I needed someone by my side, not to take care of me, but to be present, to participate in the quiet moments and the weight of growing older. But then a flood of guilt would come over me. My wife, Sarah, had died recently. I felt as if any attempt to find friendship again would be a betrayal of her memory. How could I ever let go of her presence and love? Despite my best efforts to ignore it, my loneliness became stronger with each passing day. After great trepidation, I mustered the bravery to speak with my old friend John. He listened with a knowing expression in his eyes, and his silence spoke volumes. "I get it," he murmured quietly, his voice full of compassion. After my wife died, I felt the same way. We don't need someone to rely on, just someone to talk to. Someone to share life's highs and lows with, and someone to support us when we need it the most. His remarks provided me with a sense of consolation that I had not realized I was missing. He was correct. I wasn't looking for someone to replace Sarah, but rather to relieve the aching of loneliness that had been rising inside me. I gradually began to open my heart to the prospect of finding a companion, and that's how I met Margaret. She was an older woman who lived alone, and her lively, upbeat demeanor was a breath of fresh air. We quickly became friends after sharing our experiences of living apart from our children and the tremendous loneliness that came with it. Margaret exuded an adventurous spirit, a zest for life that I had not felt in years. She was constantly exploring, going to new places, and doing things that made me realize how much I had been missing out on. Her presence restored joy to my life, and our chats, full of laughter and understanding, became something I looked forward to every day. Our bond grew deeper over time. We started doing more things together, including grocery shopping, cooking, going for walks in the park, and simply enjoying one another's company. We never properly labeled our connection, but it wasn't necessary. The link we shared was sufficient. Margaret became a true friend to me, and our once empty home was now filled with warmth, discussion, and the steady rhythm of two lives linked. When I got sick with a fever one night, I realized how important it is to have someone by your side. Margaret was on my side right away, her care for me evident in every gesture. She hastened to get me some medicine and a damp cloth to chill me down, her hands soft yet firm in their care. She called Adam and asked him to take me to the hospital. When Adam came and saw Margaret so earnestly caring for me, he was taken aback. His concern for me was obvious, but I reassured him while smiling faintly. I did not want to bother you. You have your own life, and Margaret takes good care of me. Adam was torn, but his gratitude was obvious. He insisted on taking me to the doctor, and even though I only had a fever, the simple act of being cared for made a huge impact. That night, while I lay in bed, I observed Margaret taking care of everything. The house was no longer merely a location where I lived. It had transformed into a home full of love, tenderness, and connection. The void that had previously defined my life has been replaced with something far more significant. I realized that the companionship we enjoyed was not about regaining what I had lost, but about discovering a new sort of love, one that was peaceful, steady, and soothing. It wasn't the passionate love of youth, but rather a love that provided calm, stability, and warmth in the twilight of life. Margaret was more than simply a companion. She was the light that shone through my darkness, telling me that we don't have to be alone in our old age. As time passed, the complexity of life began to manifest in unexpected ways. Margaret received a phone call one day when I was peacefully going about my usual routine, which changed everything. Her son, her cherished kid, was getting married, and he invited her back to live with him and his new family. When Margaret told me the news, I felt a wave of bitterness in my heart, but I battled to keep my emotions under control. I smiled weakly, attempting to hide the misery that was gradually overtaking me. "Your son is getting married. That's wonderful news," I remarked, hoping to appear supportive. "It's a good time for you to be with your children." But as Margaret stared at me, her eyes filled with trepidation, I could sense the internal conflict raging inside her. Her voice was just above a whisper, revealing her emotions. "But I've gotten used to being here with you," she explained, the weight of her words hanging in the air like an unspoken plea. I realized at that point that her heart was suffering, caught between the pull of family and the tie we had formed. I took a long breath and attempted to calm my thoughts, knowing I had to be the one to make this easier for her. "You should be with your son. As a mother, that is where you belong. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine here on my own," I answered, my voice trembling slightly. Inside, the weight of those words felt like a big stone in my chest. I wanted her to stay. I wanted to hold on to the warmth and comfort of our shared time, but I knew deep inside that this was what she required. After days of solitary reflection, Margaret decided to return to her son. I drove her to the bus stop, my heart full of love, sadness, and resignation. Watching her board the bus, I felt as if a piece of my heart was being left behind. As the bus drove away, I stood frozen, as if the world had suddenly gone silent, leaving me in an empty nothingness. Returning to an empty house, the silence was overwhelming. I hadn't expected loneliness, a sensation deeper than I could have imagined. I found myself confronted with the reality that many older people must endure, loneliness. The prospect of living alone in my later years began to creep into my thoughts, and tears welled up as I muttered to myself, attempting to make sense of the nothingness that had overwhelmed me. Margaret's absence had created a void that nothing seemed to fill. Each morning, I went about my routine, exercising, meeting with old friends, but the loss of her company was evident. My children, Adam and Emily, continued to check in on me, but their lives were full, and I didn't want to burden them with the weight of my loneliness. They had their own families and commitments, and despite their efforts, I could feel the distance between us. Every time they called, I reassured them that I was well, but deep inside I knew the sad truth. Loneliness was deepening, sinking further into my spirit. One afternoon in the community center, surrounded by familiar friends but feeling more alienated than ever, I overheard a conversation that changed the path of my life. A group of people were debating the prospect of going to a nursing home. It hit me like a bolt of lightning. This may be the answer. This could be the spot where I could find serenity and a sense of connectedness. The next day, I called Adam and hoped he understood. There was a long wait on the other end of the queue before he began, his voice filled with worry. "Dad, are you certain you want to move to a nursing home? Doesn't that place feel cold?" His remarks gave me pause, but I knew what I needed to say. "Adam, it isn't about the cold. It's about finding a place where I can actually be at peace for the long haul. You and Emily both lead busy lives. I don't want to be a burden for you. At least in a nursing home, there are people present. I will not be so alone." Adam paused, and I could sense concern in his voice as he vowed to address it with Emily. They returned a few days later, sitting on the couch with concerned expressions on their faces. Emily spoke first, her voice full of emotion. "Dad, we understand how difficult it is for you to be alone, but are you certain that a nursing home is the correct place? What if you feel even more isolated there?" Their worry warmed my heart, but I knew I needed to remain tough. "Don't worry about me. I've considered this thoroughly. I need a place to spend my final years in tranquility. Nursing homes are not the worst option. It isn't perfect, but it is preferable to being alone here. I don't want to impinge on your personal lives." Their silence spoke volumes, but after a lengthy time, they agreed. "Dad, if this is what you desire, we will respect your decision, but we'll come back often," Adam vowed. I felt a sense of relaxation rush over me. I wasn't wholly alone in my decision. A few months later, I transferred to a nursing facility in the suburbs. It was a lovely setting, with flower beds, activity rooms, and plenty of other seniors my age. On my first day, I went for a walk around the yard and met Mr. Robinson, a longtime resident. He greeted me with a friendly smile and offered to show me around. He also introduced me to a few new faces, which helped ease the move. That evening, as I lay in my new bed, gazing out the window at the night sky, I experienced an unusual sense of serenity. It wasn't home, nor was it the life I had envisioned, but it was a fresh start. I'd met a few new friends, and the possibility of companionship, no matter how modest, helped to alleviate my loneliness. 6 months passed, and I had established my routine. I ate consistently, worked out, and socialized with my new pals. I no longer had to deal with the terrible solitude that I had feared. I had discovered a new rhythm and sense of purpose. Though it was not the life I had envisioned, it was one I could live with. Peaceful, connected, and for the first time in a long time, full of optimism. Life had settled into a pleasant routine, punctuated by the simplicity of minor pleasures like playing chess, taking in the silence, and talking with friends. Those tiny daily routines had become my sanctuary. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of contentment and security. Adam and Emily continued to phone frequently, their voices filled with concern about my adjustment to living alone. Even though I reassured them repeatedly, they seemed to be always worried. "I am doing well. Nothing is missing. You don't have to worry about me." I tried to calm their thoughts, but I knew they couldn't truly comprehend the tranquility I had discovered in solitude. I learned to accept it, enjoy it, and feel rooted in it. But one afternoon, the world as I knew it changed. After a leisurely lunch, I sat in the sun, enjoying the warmth on my face and allowing the serenity of the moment to wash over me. When the phone rang, I answered it and heard Adam's urgent voice crackle through. His voice trembled, making my chest clench. "Dad, I've got some bad news," he began, his voice barely under control. "Mrs. Robinson was involved in a car accident and was hospitalized." The words struck me like a physical blow. My heart missed a beat, and I found myself unable to breathe. The phone almost slid from my grasp as horror paralyzed me. I had to steady myself while perched on the edge of the chair, trying to grasp the gravity of what he was saying. "What happened? How is she?" I stammered, my voice scarcely audible, terror setting in. Adam's voice faltered when he spoke again. "I just received the news and rushed over. Would you like to come to the hospital?" I felt like the ground underneath me had vanished. Mrs. Robinson's death was almost unbearable for me, since she had been a constant in my life and someone I had grown to care greatly about. At that point, I couldn't think. I couldn't reason. I hung up and called the nursing home personnel to arrange transportation, my mind racing with uncontrollable ideas. How could something as horrible happen to her now? When I last saw her, I smiled and told her to take care of herself. And now this. The sight of her joyful smile tormented me, and I couldn't stop thinking about how delicate life was. When I got to the hospital, I noticed Adam and Emily standing outside the emergency room. Their worried expressions made everything seem all too real. Adam helped me sit down, his hands trembling slightly as he guided me to my seat. "Dad," he whispered, his voice full of dread. "The doctors are doing everything they can, but the situation isn't looking good." His comments crushed me. I couldn't look at him, my pulse thumping in my chest as I glanced at the red light blinking over the surgical room door. All I could do was pray, hoping against hope that Mrs. Robinson, the strong and resilient woman who had impacted so many lives, would find a way to live. The minutes passed slowly, like an eternity. Time seemed to slow, and the air was heavy with concern and terror. The door opened, and the doctor emerged. I almost grabbed him, anxious for news and a ray of hope. "How is she?" I asked, my voice barely audible, my heart in my throat. The doctor's expression was dismal, his eyes weary. He shook his head, and I felt a chill penetrate my bones. "The injuries are severe," he explained softly. "Prepare for the worst." Those comments were like a punch in the belly, leaving me breathless and numb. I could hardly keep myself straight as Adam gently guided me back into the chair. I could feel the world spinning, and everything around me was becoming foggy. A nurse emerged shortly later, pushing Mrs. Robinson's still form down the corridor. My pulse pounded in my chest as I saw her, pale and motionless, a shadow of the bright woman I had known. She had been full of life and spirit, but now she appeared weak and helpless. The sight of her in that way crushed something deep within me. I couldn't breathe or think. I instantly reached out and took her chilly hand in mine, feeling the dramatic contrast between her warmth and the ice-cold grip of her skin. "Please, Mrs. Robinson," I said quietly, my voice faltering and my eyes welling up with tears. "Please do not leave me. You promised. We pledged to spend our lives together. You cannot leave me now." For a brief moment, I hoped she might hear me and answer. Her eyes flickered open, and for a little moment, I dared to hope. However, no words came. A single tear fell from her eye, and it felt like a dagger to my heart. My entire universe disintegrated in that second. I knelt alongside her, my hands quivering as I held her hand and sobbed hysterically. "Please," I pleaded, my voice heavy with anguish, "please don't leave. I cannot live without you. If you leave me, I'm not sure what I'll do." Adam and Emily stood silently by, their features carved with anguish and their eyes filled with the same hopelessness that consumed me. They realized there was nothing they could say or do to relieve the suffering I was experiencing at the time. That night, the doctor confirmed the worst. Mrs. Robinson's condition worsened. She was now critical. I couldn't leave her side for a second. I remained there, hoping and praying silently for her to find the strength to hold on. At one time, her eyes opened again, and her chilly hand sought for mine. I gripped it tightly, unwilling to let go. It was all I had left to offer her. Her grip on my hand tightened slightly more than before, and she fought, her breath short and labored. I could see the fight in her face, every ounce of strength attempting to reach out. "Live well, Mr. Thompson," she whispered softly, her voice frail and faint. And then, with one last soft exhale, her hand loosened, and her exhausted eyes closed for the last time. A part of me wanted to scream, ask her to wake up and stay with me for just a bit longer, but she was gone. In that horrible, unavoidable quiet, I was frozen, paralyzed by the crushing weight of the situation. My heart felt like it had broken into 1,000 jagged pieces, and I couldn't breathe. "Mrs. Robinson, don't go," I pleaded, my voice thick with anguish and despair. "Please don't leave me." But there was no response. Her absence filled the room, making it colder than any winter night. I can't find the words to convey the emptiness that overcame me at the time. It seemed as if my soul had been taken from my body, leaving nothing but a hollow shell. Mrs. Robinson was more than a friend. She was the last person who actually cared about me, saw me for who I was, and loved me unconditionally. And now she was gone. The world looked crueler and colder in some ways, and I was left to stumble through the days that followed in a cloud, a gloom that clung to me, stifling any hope of joy or calm. The pain was crushing, and no matter how many people tried to console me, it only seemed to exacerbate the loneliness. Days at the nursing home blurred together. Without her, everything looked empty, as if the hours that stretched before me had no significance. My friends and neighbors saw the difference in me. I didn't need them to say anything. I could see it in their eyes. The pity. They weren't sure how to convey their sadness. They sat with me, but no words of comfort could heal the profound wound in my heart. At our age, losses are more than simply memories. They are irreparable bits of our spirit. Once something is gone, no matter how hard we attempt to fill the void, it will always be empty. Adam and Emily stopped by frequently, bringing their small children in the hopes that their laughter and purity would lift my spirits. But no matter how hard I tried, or how much I wanted to find solace in their happiness, it all seemed so far away. My heart was a fortress, imprisoned behind walls of misery, and no amount of love could break through. I'd grin, but it was a fake gesture intended to persuade them that I was fine when, in reality, I wasn't. The stillness between us became louder with each passing day, serving as a continual reminder of Mrs. Robinson's absence. Adam sat beside me one afternoon, his expression filled with concern. He couldn't understand why I was still mourning so much, why I couldn't move on, and in his sympathetic manner, he attempted to console me. "Dad, please do not be unhappy anymore. Mrs. Robinson wouldn't want you to feel this way." His comments, while full of love, were wounded. How could he understand? He had not experienced the same level of loss as I did. "Adam, there are some things you just can't put into words," I murmured, my voice quivering. "Letting go isn't easy. You and Emily are still young, and you're still finding your way. But when someone you love with all your heart suddenly disappears, it's as if the sky has fallen and everything you've ever known is slipping through your fingers." Adam fell silent, knowing the significance of my words. Then, with great care, he grabbed my hand and softly squeezed it. "Dad, you still have us. Your children and grandchildren. We'll always be here for you." His comments, while warm and soothing, could not fill the hole I felt. They couldn't get rid of the intense, crushing loneliness that had taken root inside me. "I know you care, Adam," I replied softly, just above a whisper. "But sometimes, the emptiness in your heart is something only you can truly understand." A few days later, as I went through the garden, attempting to immerse myself in the peaceful serenity of nature, I saw a new occupant. He was an older man, his face etched with sadness, his eyes heavy with the loneliness that had troubled me when I first arrived. I felt a pang of recognition, a connection to his anguish. I walked over to him carefully, softly placing my hand on his shoulder, providing him the same comfort that I had sought for myself. "Are you new here?" I asked, my voice gentle. "Would you like to take a walk with me?" He glanced at me, and while his lips did not move to communicate, I could see thankfulness in his eyes. We went side by side through the peacefulness of the garden. We didn't say anything, but there was no need to. There was a wordless understanding between us, an awareness of the weight of our shared experience and losses. We were both simply two souls wandering through the closing chapters of our existence, seeking comfort in each other's companionship. That night, while I lay in bed, I thought about Mrs. Robinson again. Her sweet, sympathetic speech resonated in my head. Her smile and gentle touch had become the most treasured memories of my life, and these were all I had left of her. It wasn't easy to fathom life without her. But then I closed my eyes and realized something. Even though she was gone, a part of her remained with me. Her love, caring, and kindness had made a lasting impression on my heart, a mark that could not be erased. For the first time in a long time, as I lay there in the silence, the weight of my loneliness felt less heavy. It wasn't gone, but it had softened slightly. It may be enough for now. Mrs. Robinson's death left me deeply saddened, but the teaching she taught me over her life will live on in my heart. She taught me something that transcends everything else: the value of cherishing every relationship we encounter. Whether it's with family, friends, or even passing acquaintances, these bonds, however tiny or grand, fill the voids in our hearts. They give life purpose, providing us with connection, understanding, and solace when the world seems too large or overwhelming. Each connection is a thread in our lives' tapestry, held together by shared experiences, laughter, hardships, and love. Without these ties, our lives would be much less fulfilling. They are the anchors that keep us grounded, and in a world where everything is fleeting, they are one of the few constants we can count on. The morning after she died, I found myself standing in the nursing home garden. The warmth of the sun kissed my face, yet my heart felt profoundly empty. I was alone with my thoughts, the soft air whispering through the trees. In that tranquil moment, I realized that nothing in life lasts forever. But the love we share with others, the true experiences we create together, will endure. Those memories live on in our hearts. When life's storms hit, they serve as a source of strength, a reminder that we have lived fully, loved passionately, and shared a bit of ourselves with others. That love, despite the passage of time, remains, like a beacon in the darkness, guiding us when we are lost. I've realized that spiritual strength is what gets us through the most difficult circumstances. Even when life feels like an unbearable burden, it is our internal strength, fueled by our love for others and the profound relationships we've formed, that pulls us ahead. Haruki Murakami, a renowned Japanese author, famously stated, "I always thought people age slowly. In actuality, people do not just age. In the blink of an eye, a day passes, a year ends, and a lifetime goes by. Do not think you are still youthful. One day you realize that your youth is gone, the first gray hairs appear, and your face develops little wrinkles. People do age as time passes. We never fully understand the passage of time until it happens to us. It creeps up nearly unnoticed. And suddenly, you find yourself in a situation in which time appears to have slipped away without your knowledge. The realization that you no longer want to talk about your age comes gradually, like a silent acknowledgement that you have crossed a threshold. As you become older, the weight of time becomes impossible to ignore. When your parents begin to age and want your assistance, you realize with surprise that you have crossed the line of youth. The world begins to treat you differently, calling you sir or ma'am, and you experience a twinge of unease in those instances. You can't deny it anymore, you're no longer young. Some may ask, what's so scary about aging? But the truth is, as soon as those words leave your lips, you feel their weight. It's a soothing fiction, a method to tell yourself that things aren't as horrible as they appear. Yet deep inside, you might feel tears welling up, unspoken and unseen. The world quiets around you, not because there aren't enough words, but because everyone understands there aren't any words left to offer genuine comfort. The realization dawns on you. You've lived a lifetime, but no one truly understands your path. You may have a large number of acquaintances, friends, and colleagues in your life, but how many genuinely understand you? How many people actually listen to the whispering of their soul? In the end, we frequently find ourselves alone in our thoughts, even while surrounded by others. People's comforting words can sometimes feel hollow, a courteous gesture intended to fill the void. But sometimes, instead of answering with meaningless words, we prefer to keep silent. It is not out of bitterness, but rather an understanding that only we can understand our own hearts. The quiet transforms into a hallowed zone, in which we allow ourselves to listen to the rhythm of our thoughts and feel the beat of our hearts. When night falls and the world goes to sleep, the sound of your heartbeat brings you comfort. Alone, yes, but not lonely. There's a certain freedom in being alone and comfort in knowing you don't need the approval of others. Their problems, their opinions are no longer a burden on your shoulders. You've learned to trust yourself, to put your character and judgment above the transitory opinions of others around you. Time goes by undetected at times, and as you get older, you realize that the clamor of the world becomes quieter. Not because there's nothing left to say, but because there's nothing else that has to be said. People gradually come to realize that silence can speak louder than words. How many people around you genuinely understand your journey? Few, if any. At times, you may feel as if no one is really listening. That may be okay. Words of comfort frequently obscure the deeper truth, the one we are unwilling to face. So you chose silence. That calm allows you to gain clarity and a greater connection with yourself. Only then can you hear your heart, your actual ideas, free of influence from others. Adversity frequently feels more prominent than any advantage we may have. Life is full of challenges, and sometimes it appears that failing is the only alternative. But despite it all, we learn to understand that there are things beyond our control, and that acceptance brings calm. You begin to realize that as long as you give your all, you can hold your head high and be free of shame. You develop self-respect via humility rather than pride. You recognize your own goodness, but rather than using it to boost your ego, you carry it with grace. Humility becomes a part of your essence, which makes you even more deserving of respect. As time passes, you can't help but notice changes in yourself. They are subtle, sometimes unnoticeable, but indisputable. You've evolved with age, and as the world around you changes, one thing becomes clear. You've become more than you ever imagined imaginable. Years, difficulties, and joys have shaped you, and now you're stronger, smarter, and more conscious of life's beauty, no matter how ephemeral. Old age has been a persistent teacher, molding my spirit, broadening my perception of life, and most profoundly, changing my perspective on love. I used to believe that love was simple and pure, something that could be represented by two people holding hands, never letting go, and growing old side by side, forever. I believed that love was the anchor that would keep us grounded, and that no amount of time could shake it. But as the years passed, I came to realize the truth, a bittersweet truth. Many relationships are transitory, like a flower's petals, which bloom brightly but fade swiftly. They are fleeting, frequently about the moments we share rather than the eternity we previously envisioned. Life goes so quickly that the past, present, and future blend together. We realize with a quiet ache that the individuals who once seemed so irreplaceable, the cornerstones of our lives, have either changed or gone away. Even the most beloved memories, which were once brilliant and alive, continue to fade over time. The longer you live, the more you realize that life, in all of its exquisite complexity, can bring both joy and great pain. Sometimes, acknowledging this truth feels impossible. You are struggling in the depths of your spirit to accept it. However, there is an evident sense of serenity that comes with realizing that not everything is meant to remain the same. Some things, once beautiful in our eyes, lose their luster, leaving us with little choice but to let them go. Things that used to worry you, moments spent criticizing or attempting to improve, begin to drift into the background. You realize that some things exist, and no amount of wishing can change that. Life does not ask permission to change, it simply does. You will be disappointed both by others and by yourself. It's difficult to admit, but we sometimes offer too much of ourselves to others, and in exchange, we feel empty, as if our goodness was taken for granted. People who once needed you now believe that your love and care are guaranteed, as if they can always count on it. I've learned, sometimes hard, that I need to be kinder to myself. To maintain my well-being, I must guard my heart more fiercely, and if necessary, be a little colder towards others. As time passes, you realize that disappointment is more than simply a passing emotion. It is a continuous companion on the road of life. The more you put your heart into anything, the more vulnerable you are to being let down. However, vulnerability has a peculiar beauty because it reminds you that you are still alive, hoping and striving for something better. Over time, I've realized that it's unwise to put all your hopes in one location. Although hope is powerful, it can also lead to great disappointment. It is in this realization that you begin to understand the delicate dance of hope and acceptance. There are times when you must press forward with all your might, but there are other times when you must pull back, take a deep breath, and allow things to happen. The secret is to learn to strike a balance between hope and disappointment. When you do, you stop worrying about the outcome. What truly matters is not what you get or lose, but how you handle it all and continue to go on with grace, regardless of the trials life throws at you. Finally, after all of the love, grief, hope, and disappointment, I've realized one important truth. The only way to avoid true failure is to rely on oneself. While having the support of others is comforting, being self-sufficient provides a deeper, quieter strength, knowing that in the end, you are the one who will always be there for you. When the world feels unclear and there is no one else to turn to, you will realize how strong you truly are. This is the point at which you rise, not because you have to, but because you realize you have always had the strength within yourself. And that, above all things, is the most valuable present you can offer yourself. As we approach the end of this study, I encourage you to think thoroughly about what you've learned from these life lessons. Life teaches us a lot about love, grief, hope, and the great strength that exists inside us. What spoke to you the most today? What one lesson will you take with you, and how do you intend to put it into action in your own life? I would love to hear your thoughts. In the comments section below, please share one item you've learned and how it will impact your future activities. Your observations have the potential to inspire and motivate others who are going through similar experiences. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment below and remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for viewing, and I hope to see you in the next video.